Hi, I'm Spencer Christian. On this episode of Tracks Ahead, we'll visit an operational layout that has recreated the Cajon Pass area, see what roller coasters and trains have in common, and look in on one of the largest railroad museums in the country. You know, there are few places in America where you can step back and experience a simpler time than you can in the middle of Pennsylvania Dutch country. But while you're there, you can also take advantage of the opportunity to experience one of the most impressive and significant collections of railroad history in the world.
It is some of the most peaceful and beautiful land in all of America. Lancaster County, Pennsylvania is home to more than 15,000 Amish residents who practice a faith and live a lifestyle grounded in a much simpler time. In nearby Strasburg, there is another rare opportunity to peek into the past. The Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania is a home for history, but it's a place that recognizes that railroad history is alive and continues to be made. It's an unfolding story of the industry that helped build this country. There are more than 100 historic locomotives and vintage railroad cars spread out over 100,000 square feet under the roof of Locomotive and Rolling Stock Hall and under the open skies of Restoration Yard. It is home to Pennsylvania history, railroad history, and our history.
The collection was made or used in Pennsylvania, so we have a large variety of items that were made in Philadelphia, for example, at the Baldwin Locomotive Works, at the Vulcan Iron Works in Scranton, or the Porter Works in Pittsburgh. We also have a number of railroad car manufacturers, such as the Budd Company and the American Press Steel Car Company, represented in the collection. And there's something for just about everybody here at the museum. Steam engines, diesel electrics, we have freight, passenger, you name it, we have it.
There are impressive examples of each stage of railroad history, be it steam, diesel, or electric. If you coupled the pieces in this collection together, it would form a train more than a mile long.
The Lindbergh steam engine is a Pennsylvania Railroad Class E6 locomotive, which is an Atlantic type that was actually run from Washington, D.C. to New York City, racing an airplane in 1927. The E7 was the first diesel-electric passenger locomotive delivered to the Pennsylvania Railroad in September of 1945. And it was very successful in the fact that they had to actually monitor it very carefully, because a normal steam engine would go maybe 9,000 or 10,000 miles before it would need major servicing. And this locomotive ran for almost 80,000 miles before it needed its major servicing. And when the Pennsylvania Railroad Board of Directors saw that statistic, they knew that the days of steam were pretty much limited on the Pennsylvania Railroad, and they began to then phase out steam and go to diesel-electric locomotives. The GG1s were developed by the Baldwin Locomotive Works and GE for the Pennsylvania Railroad in 1934. And these were an electric locomotive designed to run on the new electrified corridor up and down the East Coast, and also from Philadelphia to Harrisburg. And these engines were designed for high-speed passenger traffic. They were capable of speeds easily up to 110 miles an hour with a full steel train behind them.
The museum uses as a slogan, "Real trains, real history, real excitement," because this is a place where history comes to life. The Locomotive Cab Simulator lets you feel what it's like to be running an authentic Norfolk Southern freight locomotive. The run may be simulated, but the feeling is real. There's the popular air brake instruction car. There's a working restoration shop where you can see the meticulous attention to detail that goes into the preservation of history. The popular Stewart Junction Railway Education Center presents hands-on, interesting activities for young railroaders. And you'll always find a working model railroad set up here too, such as this impressive Rail Dreams built HO layout.
The middle division layout that's on display in our lobby was donated by the Darrow family. The father had passed on, and the four sons decided that the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania would be a great place to display it. So they donated it and got Rail Dreams to put together a reconfigured layout that fit within our space. And it is a depiction of the Pennsylvania Railroad Middle Division between Lewistown and Mifflintown, Pennsylvania. And it has a lot of the features in HO scale, of course, that were along the tracks in that area.
The museum also regularly hosts exhibits featuring railroad art and photography. Railroading is multidimensional, and this museum is too. Now, right across the street, you'll find another of Lancaster County's most popular attraction, The Strasbourg Railroad is America's oldest short-line railroad. Founded more than 175 years ago, the Strasbourg Railroad has grown from being a one-time freight hauler into an impressive tourist destination. The 45-minute trip through the peaceful Pennsylvania Dutch countryside is both relaxing and educational. And you'll have to decide which is prettier, the locomotive or the scenery.
475 is the Norfolk and Western 480. It's the only one running in this country. It was built in 1906, I believe, and it was built primarily to haul freight, and it was a very large locomotive for its time, and it had a very short tender. It's actually built a lot like a narrow gauge engine. We have more Amish farms along the line than we did when the railroad first started back in '58. And it's pretty much untouched since then, and it's just beautiful farmland.
The beautifully restored parlor and dining cars offer both nostalgic elegance and modern convenience. If you really want to live the high life, climb aboard the Reading Car Number 10, a genuine railroad president's private car.
The president's cars also were called business cars, and typically they were used by railroad officials to travel over their respective railroads. Well, Reading Car 10 is pretty unique in a number of different ways. First of all, it's only had two homes, the Reading Railroad and the Strasbourg Railroad. Three fellows here at the railroad bought the car back in the early 60s, and it came basically right off a Reading business trip delivered to the Strasbourg Railroad. The interior is virtually original. I mean, there's been some modifications made by the Reading, mostly. A few modifications here at Strasbourg, but it's beautiful inlaid mahogany. The marquetry is just gorgeous on it. It's really a cool car.
The entertainment at the Strasbourg Railroad doesn't stop the moment you get off the train. There's affordable fun for the whole family. Here on the grounds, there are experiences for the kids that will live on long after your trip to the Strasbourg Railroad has ended. And for the mechanically inclined, a visit to the well-respected shops here will show you how the trains are refurbished and maintained. A day in Strasbourg is indeed like a day in the past, but you'll leave with a new appreciation for how the railroading industry helped pull this country into the future.
Be sure to check in advance for operating times for both the museum and the railroad. The Cajon Pass area has always been a favorite railroading spot. There are plenty of trains and lots of operational possibilities. That area has been recreated on a layout that takes 20 to 25 people to operate. Let's take a look.
Cajon Pass, at the northern end of the Los Angeles Basin. It's the setting for dozens of stories about railroading legends. And in Ted York's basement in Alpine, Utah, the past comes alive in HO gauge splendor, much to the delight of the modeling aficionados who are fortunate enough to come here to play. Ted's love of railroading and modeling began at a remarkably young age.
I was born on Christmas Eve, and my dad tells me that he was playing with my Lionel train set the next day under the Christmas tree. You know, from there he built a 4x8 railroad in a sandbox. He was in the military, and we moved all around, and we took that 4x8 with us everywhere we went. I can remember from the earliest days watching the railroads as we traveled across country, looking at buildings and at trains and wondering what it would be like to model them. Anyway, when I moved into my current home, I was looking for a prototype to model, and I had a lot of Union Pacific and Santa Fe equipment, and so I was trying to find something where I could use a lot of what I already owned, and the Cajon Pass was a natural. We're modeling the pass between the years, between the late 40s and early 50s. We're modeling from San Bernardino up to a place called the Summit, which was actually the summit on the railroad, where they turned the helpers for their return back to San Bernardino. We cover about between 4 and 6 miles of what was actually 25 miles on the prototype. We've compacted the prototype, and so we had to figure out what we would include in the design and what we would take out of the design. I wanted to build a railroad that would support trains long enough to look like they needed helpers anyway, and so I had to put in some fairly long sidings, and so we had to drop out a lot of the features that I would like to model. The vertical planning was a challenge. As an example, if we had the lateral distance to model an entire 25 miles, we would have needed about 37 feet for the vertical. And even with the 4 miles that we have, we still needed to compensate. And we did things like we leveled the track through the depot areas so that we didn't climb as much. And then we also brought down the grade a little bit. Unlike the prototype, we wanted the steeper grade to be on the uphill track because we wanted to be able to justify the helpers and make it difficult for the operators. On the other hand, on the downhill track, we didn't want it to be as steep because that creates mechanical problems with the locomotives. One of the things that I had to do was to hand carve all the rock work. You know, we were trying to duplicate actual rock work that you can still see today, and in the usual methods of creating molds and such were not going to work. So what we did was I would throw the plaster on and actually carve it or sculpt it while it was setting up and hardening. And then, of course, we had to come up with ideas for vegetation, such as, our sagebrush and the yucca plants and the various things that were found on the pass. Well, most of the buildings are scratch-built to the actual structures that were on the railroad, at least to the best of our knowledge. And we gather photographs and data and talk to people and then create CAD drawings. And then from there, we cut up sheets of styrene and start out with a basic shape. And then from there, we start adding details and then, of course, obviously paint and such and weathering to make them look like the actual structures that were there. We run the helper operations pretty much like the actual railroad. None of our helpers are immued to the head-end crew, meaning that we use 2 engineers to run every train up the hill. And the helper engines are controlled separately from the head-end locomotives. When we get up to the summit, we turn the locomotives and we run them light back down to San Bernardino. And so the operations are pretty prototypical.
With countless hours invested and a photographer's eye for detail, Ted has created a layout in which he can honestly take pride.
Well, I think one of the things is that it's a prototype layout. Again, with the scratch-built structures and such, it doesn't look like everybody else's layout. And another thing is that it's based on mainline running. We do a lot of operating sessions. We bring in 20 to 24 folks, and we actually run about a 24-hour schedule. And it's mainline running. We move trains. We don't do a lot of switching. We probably do 80 train movements in the period, in about a 5.5 hour period. And I think that makes us a little bit different than the average layout.
It's not easy to say goodbye to Ted York and his Cajon Pass layout. After exploring the magnificent results of all the years of Ted's hard work, we just want to stay and play for a while.
Ted says you should pay close attention to the technical side of your layout. If it doesn't run well, it won't be any fun. In a moment, we'll visit one of the railway museums that should be on your not-to-be-missed list. It can be found just northwest of Chicago in the little town of Union, Illinois. But first, what do railroads and roller coasters have in common? When a park in Sandusky, Ohio built its latest, greatest roller coaster, it looked to a steam train for inspiration.
Welcome to the Cedar Point Amusement Park. Leave your stomach at the door. This is the roller coaster capital of the world. Here you'll find 17 of the fastest, tallest, scariest coasters, along with dozens of other rides that swing, spin, twirl, and plunge at thrilling speeds.
Cedar Point is on a peninsula in Lake Erie. It's located midway between Cleveland, Ohio and Toledo, and it's jutted out on into Lake Erie. It's 364 acres and encompasses this entire land, surrounded by water on 3 sides. It's got a very unique atmosphere, named for the cedar trees that grew here, and home, obviously, to the most rides and roller coasters anywhere on Earth.
But Cedar Point has another claim to fame. It's also the second oldest amusement park in North America. The traditional rides of the Midway are here, along with another classic ride, the steam train. Other parks have trains, but Cedar Point is one of the few parks in the world to be running genuine coal-fired steam locomotives.
Most amusement parks don't have live steam. A lot of them have, the diesel-type engines that look like steam engines, but they're not. But the parks that have steam locomotives are a little bit more special because it takes a lot to maintain them, a lot to run them, and of course, it's something that the families enjoy when they ride them.
The Cedar Point Amusement Park got its start back in 1870 as a beer garden and bathhouse, accessible only by a 25-cent steamboat ride. The park expanded as a public resort and playground until the 1950s, when developers threatened to fill the area with private homes.
The state of Ohio and residents in the area wanted to prevent that from happening because it was a resort that guests came to enjoy the beach and to take day trips over here and stay at the hotel and things of that nature.
Public outcry saved the park, and new attractions were built to expand its appeal, including the Cedar Point and Lake Erie Railroad. In 1963, this engine, nicknamed Albert, was the first of 6 steam locomotives brought here to run an excursion train through the park. Albert was built in 1910 to haul sugarcane in Louisiana. While the engine is currently out of service, it remains the personal favorite of Randy Catry, a full-time engineer at Cedar Point.
Albert's always been my favorite. It's a 1910 Davenport. It's right now on display on the trail. It's 260. It's just a little older. I don't know. It's a plantation engine from Louisiana. Just always, when I first started, it's an engine we ran quite heavy. And it's just an engine I enjoyed running.
Currently, the 2 engines that run most of the daily excursions are known as Myron and Judy. They were built in the 1920s for mining companies, and both have undergone major work to keep them up to speed during the busy summer season.
Both engines are Vulcans. They were built in 1922 and 1923. They were rebuilt in 1990 by Shop Services in Iowa. The last couple of years we've gone over and stripped them down to the boilers and reworked them as far as new tubes, and the boiler shells were checked for thickness and rejacketed. So been pretty good engines for us.
At 10 a.m., the park is opened for the day, and the steam train is ready for boarders. For Randy, this is the part that makes all the hard work worthwhile.
Here at Cedar Point, over 3 million guests visit us every year, and the train is, of course, one of our most popular attractions. And the reason for that is it gives guests an option from going to the front of the park to the back of the park.
But the train is more than just a way to get to and from the Midway. Along this scenic 2-mile excursion, the roller coasters become part of the scenery. At times, the train travels right alongside the coaster tracks, giving passengers a unique view of the ride in action. In 2007, the Cedar Point Amusement Park introduced its 17th roller coaster, the Mavic, a ride that plummets from dizzying heights and zips through hairpin turns at speeds reaching 70 miles per hour. The inspiration for this high-tech screen machine? The classic steam locomotive.
The Mavic roller coaster was themed to the Old West, and part of the Old West, of course, is steam locomotives and steam trains. So we wanted to reflect that era in the trains on this coaster, and you'll see that the front of the trains have cow catchers on them that are themed to an old steam train. It's got rivets along the side, so it looks like real steel. And we wanted to kind of capture that Old West feel in all of those trains. So all 6 of those trains have that theming.
As the roller coasters of Cedar Point find new ways to defy gravity, the classic steam engines of the Cedar Point and Lake Erie Railroad continue their daily excursions through the park, as they have for nearly a century. Their mere presence is a rare thrill indeed.
But here at Cedar Point, we've taken great pride in having these locomotives and having this railroad here, and it's a tradition that started, back in the 50s and will continue as long as we can maintain it. It is unusual, but we're fortunate enough to be one of those few that has it.
Just northwest of Chicago and south of the Illinois-Wisconsin state line, you'll find one of the largest collections of trolley and railroad items in the United States. The story actually started back in 1941, when a group of Chicago enthusiasts try to purchase an interurban car from an abandoned line in Indiana. World War II and a lack of funds halted their plans, but a second chance arose in 1953. This time, the group was ready.
The museum was founded on the basis of the 65 car. It was a group of 10 individuals got together and they wanted to save this one car. And they did save it, and that was the beginning of the Electric Railway Museum.
With Chicago and Milwaukee area cars ending their useful lives, the museum decided that one or two of the more important types should be saved. Their first project was a 1906 Chicago Surface Lines car that had been turned into a salt spreader.
What the Surface Lines did, the CTA did, I mean, they chopped holes in it, and they did everything that possibly do just to not ever use it as a streetcar again. It was a project that took almost 17 years to do, but it's in pristine condition. It's totally restored.
Since that time, the museum has acquired and sheltered an impressive collection of locomotives and cars. Visitors will find engines of all types and sizes, but the pride of the collection is found in two historic train sets, the Nebraska Zephyr and one of the two 1941 Electroliners.
Ran on the Chicago North Shore Milwaukee Railroad, and it was rather an experimental car, as it was the first car to have air conditioning. They were in service until 1963, and both were sold to Philadelphia, where they ran on one of their high-speed lines.
It takes a lot of work and a great deal of time to bring just one of these cars back to life. Take car number 141 as an example.
It was built in 1924 by the Cummings Car Company in Paris, Illinois, and shipped to the Chicago and West Towns Railway. After abandonment of the streetcar system in 1948, the car was slated to be scrapped, but instead was sold as a car body. It was stripped of parts and sold to the farming community in DuPage County, Illinois. After we received the car and brought it here, we kept it covered up, and then later it was put into buildings, and we started the restoration project in the early 90s.
In addition to the static displays, visitors will find a two-division demonstration railroad. Steam, diesel, and heavy electric trains run on the 5-mile-long main line, which takes weekend visitors from East Union Depot on a 40-minute round trip to Kishwaukee Grove. The second division is a mile-long streetcar loop. Shady streetcar stops evoke the past as visitors get a short ride to Central Avenue and to the refreshment stand. It isn't all engines and cars. Neon signs remind visitors of the great area surface lines of the past. And historic station and Junction Tower are all still in use. Restoration on both steam and diesel engines is ongoing.
We're working on our decapod, which is a 210-0 Russian decapod made by Baldwin in 1918.
Internal combustion is not to be forgotten as they work to restore items such as this Baldwin center cab, a GP9, and this Alco RS3.
We do have the U-boat, which is a U-30C. That has just been restored too.
Volunteerism is a major part of the museum's operation. From the early days to the present, it's been volunteers who do the work, man the cars, and run the museum.
That's the backbone of our fleet. I mean, our volunteers are the most important thing that we have. Most of the work you see done out here are done by volunteers.
The museum offers researchers extensive information in two unique libraries. The first is the Strayhorn Library, an extensive collection of railroad books, periodicals, technical data, and professional journals. Second is the Pullman Library, where you can find all the remaining construction drawings, photographs, and technical data from the Pullman Car Company. The museum currently has over 400 pieces in its collection and has an acquisition program to obtain more.
It's impossible to restore everything, of course, but we do try our hardest to restore one type of piece of equipment. That we might have two, but we still try to restore just the one and have it for display.
The Illinois Railroad Museum has a right to be proud of its growth and accomplishments. Its vast collection of historical engines and cars makes it one of the must-see stops in the Midwest.
museum has a varied schedule, so be sure to check out the website for current information. That's it for this episode. Please be sure to join us next time for more Tracks Ahead.